rented the storage unit because I thought it would make moving easier. I was 21, and halfway through moving out of my parents' house into an apartment across town. My lease started in early June, but I still had 2 more weeks before I could move in because the place needed work after the last tenant left. I didn't want all my furniture and boxes stacked in my parents' garage, so I rented a storage unit about 15 minutes away. The facility seemed normal enough. Front office, keypad gate, rows of outdoor units on one side, and an indoor building on the other. Mine was inside, on the 2nd floor, down a bright hallway with white roll-up doors on both sides. Unit 214. Small, but enough for boxes, a mattress, a desk, and a few plastic bins. The first week, nothing felt strange. I would stop there every few days after work, drop off another load, lock up, and leave. The building was usually quiet, but not empty. Then I noticed something strange about the lock. I had bought a new round disc lock from the front office because the manager said they were harder to cut. It had a brushed steel face and one shallow scratch near the keyhole from where I dropped it in the parking lot the first day. That scratch was why I knew something was off on the 9th or 10th day. I got off the elevator, walked down the hall, and saw my unit from maybe 20 feet away. The lock was hanging the wrong way. That sounds stupid, but when you use the same lock enough times, you know how it sits. I always closed it with the keyhole facing down because it was easier to line up that way. This time, the keyhole was facing left. I told myself I must have left it that way without thinking. People do things automatically and remember them differently later. I unlocked the unit, slid the door up, and looked inside. At first, everything seemed fine. Then I saw the lamp. It was an old floor lamp I was storing for my mother. I had laid it diagonally on top of 2 bins because the shade was loose and I didn't want it crushed. Now it was standing upright in the back corner of the unit, wedged between my mattress and the wall. That was not something I could have remembered wrong. I stepped inside and looked around more carefully. A few boxes had shifted, not far. Just enough that the labels no longer faced out the way I had left them. My guitar case, which had been flat against the left wall, was now leaning upright near the front. Nothing was missing. If someone had been inside, why move things around and take nothing? I spent the rest of that visit trying to reconstruct some version where I had done it myself. But the next time I came back, it got worse. I'd brought another carload of kitchen stuff from my parents' house and came in around 7 at night. The building was almost empty by then. When I got to 214, the lock was facing left again. My stomach dropped immediately. This time, before opening the unit, I took a picture of the lock. Then I unlocked it and stepped inside. There was a folding chair in the middle of the storage unit. Not mine. White plastic, the cheap kind used for outdoor parties, was unfolded and facing the door. For maybe 3 full seconds, I just stood there, looking at it. Then I looked over the rest of the unit. The floor lamp was back down on the bins. My desk chair had been turned to face inward. One of the lids on the storage tubs wasn't snapped all the way shut anymore. Again, nothing missing. And again. That almost made it worse, because it meant whoever had been in there wasn't digging for valuables. They were spending time in the unit. I dragged the plastic chair into the hall and took it to the end of the corridor by the trash room. Then I went downstairs to the office. A young guy was working the desk. I told him I thought someone might have accessed my unit. He asked whether anything had been stolen. I said no, but things had definitely been moved, and there was a chair inside that didn't belong to me. He looked skeptical immediately. He said only I should have had the key to my lock, and that the hallway cameras only covered the elevator and loading door, not each individual unit. Then he asked if maybe I had used one of the facility's spare moving chairs and forgotten to return it. He took down my number, said the manager would review what they could, and that was it. I should have moved everything out that night. Instead, I bought a second lock. It was one of those long hasp locks meant for outdoor sheds. I latched it through one of the door brackets below the main latch, so the roll-up door couldn't be raised at all without removing both locks. Then I took pictures of everything inside the unit before I left. For 4 days, nothing happened. Then on Friday, I came back after work with one more box and saw both locks still in place. I felt relief before I even reached the door. Then I noticed the second lock was open, hanging through the bracket but not actually closed. The key to that lock was on my ring with my car key and apartment key. No one else had it. I took another picture, unlocked the disc lock, and opened the unit. The chair was back. Same cheap white chair, same position, facing the door. This time there was something on the seat. A bottle of water. Half full, cap screwed on. And under it, a sticky note. I picked it up and read 3 words. "You missed Wednesday." That was the first moment I felt actual fear instead of confusion, because whoever wrote it had not only been inside. They were expecting me on a day I hadn't come. Wednesday was the day I usually stopped there after my afternoon shift. I had skipped it because my mother wanted help moving a bookshelf, and I ended up staying at her place later than planned. Somebody had noticed. I left everything where it was, pulled the door shut, locked nothing, and went straight back downstairs. The manager was there this time, an older woman with short gray hair. I told her everything from the beginning, including the note. That changed her face immediately. She came upstairs with me. The note was still on the chair. The water bottle was still there. She read the paper once, then asked me to wait in the hall while she checked the unit herself. When she stepped back out a minute later, she asked one question. "Has anyone else ever helped you unload?" I said no. Then she told me something I had never noticed. At the back of the unit, behind my mattress, was a small rectangular access panel in the wall for fire suppression plumbing. It was supposed to be screwed shut. One of the screws was missing. The panel could be pulled open from my side if you knew where to grip it. She called it a maintenance issue at first, but that fell apart when another employee checked the neighboring unit on the other side of that wall. It was empty. No renter for 6 weeks. And inside it, on the floor near the shared wall, were 2 more white chairs, snack wrappers, and a flashlight. I moved out of the facility the next morning. If someone is patient enough, they don't even need your things. They just need to know when you'll be back for them. I booked the ride because the train stopped running after midnight. I was 22 and coming back from a friend's birthday in the city. I don't drink, so I had offered to stay later than everyone else and make sure nobody left alone. That sounded smart until the last train out was canceled because of a signal problem, and half the station emptied into the rideshare pickup lot at the same time. It was after 12:30. The station was one of those bright, glassy downtown terminals that feels safe as long as there are enough people in it. Outside, though, the pickup area was a narrow curb along a side street with construction barriers on one end and a dark parking deck on the other. Every few seconds, another car would pull up. Someone would lean into a window to check a name, and then the car would be gone again. I requested a ride home and got matched almost immediately. The app said the driver's name was Omar, silver Toyota Camry, last 3 digits 842. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes. I moved a little farther from the crowd so I could see the plates more clearly, and texted my roommate that I was on my way. She responded with a thumbs up and asked if I wanted her to wait up. I said no because I figured I'd be home in 30 minutes. 3 minutes later, a silver Camry pulled up. The last 3 digits on the plate were 842. The driver was older than the profile photo in the app. Not wildly different, but enough that I noticed. The app photo showed a guy maybe in his 30s, with close cropped hair and no facial hair. The man behind the wheel looked closer to 50 and had a short beard. I leaned down to the open window and asked, "Omar?" He nodded once and said my name before I offered it. That should have settled it. He had the right car, the right plate, and my name. I got in the back, The ride started normally enough. He pulled away from the station, merged through downtown traffic, and followed the same route the app showed for the first few minutes. I sat behind the passenger seat with my bag on my lap and texted my roommate again that I had left. The first odd thing he said came at the second red light. Without looking in the mirror, he asked, "You always come back on Fridays this late." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" He tapped the steering wheel once and said, "From the city. Fridays." I told him not always. He gave a small nod like that confirmed something. Then he said, "I thought it was usually earlier." That sat wrong with me immediately. There was no reason for a rideshare driver to say it that way. If he was making small talk, the normal version would have been, "Busy night?" or "Coming from downtown?" Not a comment that sounded like he had some prior idea of when I usually came back. I looked down at the app. The route still looked normal. The driver details still showed Omar. I told myself he was maybe confusing me with another passenger. Lots of people went home from that station late on Fridays. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message through the app from the driver. I opened it without thinking. I'm outside. Silver Camry by pickup sign. I stared at the screen for a second before my brain caught up. The message was time-stamped less than 10 seconds earlier, which meant the real driver attached to my ride was still at the station. I checked the app again. The car icon on the map wasn't moving with us. It was still back near the terminal. Every part of me went cold at once. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched the route on the screen, then looked at the back of the driver's head. He must have seen the movement in the mirror because he asked, "Everything okay?" I said, "I think I got in the wrong car." He smiled a little at that, not in a friendly way, more like I had finally said something he'd been waiting for. "No," he said. "You got in because the plate matched." I didn't answer. He kept driving. I grabbed the door handle beside me and pulled. Child lock. The door didn't open. I don't know if he heard the handle move or just expected me to try it. But he said, very calmly, "Don't do that while the car is moving." We were off the main downtown streets by then, heading through a warehouse district toward the River Road. It wasn't deserted, but it was emptier than the route should have been. The app on my phone still showed my actual ride waiting at the station, and every second I kept moving away from it made the whole thing feel more real. I said, "Pull over." He didn't. Instead, he said, "I just need to ask you something." I didn't answer that either. He took one hand off the wheel and pointed ahead through the windshield. "See, you've been taking rides from that station for a few weeks now. Always home by 1, sometimes earlier. I just needed to make sure it was you. I felt like all the air had left the car." There was a pause after he said it, like he thought that explanation should make sense to me. Then he added, "You never noticed the cars." That was when I understood the plate. He had copied it somehow, either from waiting at the station often enough to see what cars were getting rides there, or from standing close enough to my real driver to know exactly what I'd be looking for before I got in. I unlocked my phone again and pulled up the emergency call screen, not because I planned to call yet, but because I wanted him to see me doing something. He noticed immediately. "Don't," he said. Still calm, still almost polite. I said, "Then let me out." He turned onto a darker service road running along the back of an industrial lot. Chain link fence on one side, loading docks on the other. No traffic. My mind was moving stupidly slow from adrenaline, but one thing kept coming back clearly. The front passenger door did not have child lock. I leaned forward and grabbed the back of the passenger seat with one hand. He must have realized what I was doing at the same time, because he swore under his breath and reached across with his right arm. I slammed my palm against the horn, long enough that the sound echoed between the loading docks. Then I did it again. The car jerked slightly as he tried to pull my arm away. I used that second to reach over the seat and shove at the front passenger handle. It opened. Just enough that cold air hit the car. He hit the brakes hard. I don't remember deciding to move. I just know that 1 second I was halfway over the center console, and the next, I was out on the pavement, stumbling and catching myself on my hands. The passenger door was still open behind me. He shouted something I couldn't make out. I ran toward the only light I could see, a shipping office door with a cigarette stand outside it about 50 yards away. 2 men in reflective jackets were standing there on break, both of them turning at the sound of the horn and the door slamming. By the time I reached them and looked back, the car was already reversing down the service road. I stayed in that office until my roommate came to get me. What stayed with me wasn't the copied plate, or even the child lock. It was the sentence about how I never noticed the cars, because he was right. I had been treating that station the same way every Friday for weeks, getting picked up from the same sign, looking for the same details, assuming that was enough to keep the whole process safe. He didn't need to know me. He only needed to know my routine better than I knew his. I almost skipped the interview because it was on a Saturday. I was 21, living back at my parents' house after finishing school, and I had spent most of that summer sending applications for entry-level office jobs. By then, every day felt the same. Wake up, check email, search listings, rewrite the same cover letter. Wait. So when I got a message from a company called Meriton Data Solutions asking if I could interview that weekend, I said yes almost immediately. The job itself sounded boring. Administrative assistant, full-time, decent pay. The posting had been on a site I used all the time. The email said they were doing weekend interviews because they were moving into a new office and wanted to finish hiring before Monday. Weird, but believable. The interview was set for 8:30 in the morning at an office park about 30 minutes from my house. The email included a suite number, a contact name, Daniel Mercer, and a line telling me to bring a printed copy of my resume, even though I had already uploaded one. The office park was on the edge of an industrial area near the highway. When I pulled in, it was almost empty. Most of the buildings were dark, with only a few cars scattered around the larger ones. The suite I needed was in a smaller 2-story building at the far end of the lot. Suite 204 was upstairs. There was no sign outside, except a sheet of printer paper taped beside the glass door with Meriton Data Solutions typed across it in plain black letters. I remember stopping on the sidewalk and looking at it for a second. Then I told myself they were still moving in, which fit the email. Inside, the second-floor hallway was quiet and half-lit. Suite 204 was at the very end. Its door was propped open with a plastic trash can. A man inside looked up the moment I reached it. "Claire?" he asked. I nodded. "Perfect. You're right on time." He looked late 30s maybe, wearing a dark button-down with the sleeves rolled up. Nothing about him stood out except that the office behind him looked almost empty. A reception desk, 2 folding chairs, a copier by the wall. Beyond that, a short hall leading to 2 offices and a conference room with the lights off. It looked less like a business and more like a place somebody had just started packing up. He must have noticed me taking it in because he smiled and said, "Sorry about the setup. We're between spaces." He handed me a clipboard with a 1-page form on it. Name, phone number, address, current employer, emergency contact. That last part felt more personal than most interview forms, but I filled it out anyway. While I wrote, he asked if I had any trouble finding the building. I said no. Then he asked, "Did you come straight from home?" I looked up at that. He smiled slightly and said, "Only asking because people get turned around in this area if they stop somewhere first." I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do, and said yes, straight from home. When I handed the clipboard back, he read it for longer than he needed to. Then he asked, "Does anyone know you're here?" I actually thought I had misheard him. "What?" He tapped the emergency contact line. I mean, did you tell anyone where you were going this morning? I said my mother knew I had an interview. He nodded once and set the clipboard down. That was the first point where I thought about leaving. The whole conversation felt slightly off. Still, he had my name, my resume, and the job title. There was enough structure around it that I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. Then he stood and said, "Let's use the back office. It's quieter." I followed him down the hall mostly because I wanted one good explanation for why the place felt wrong. The office he led me to was even barer than the reception area. One desk, 2 chairs, no computer, just a legal pad, my printed resume, and a bottle of water. The blinds were closed. On the far wall was another door with a silver push bar, the kind that usually opens into a stairwell or service hall. The interview started normally. He asked about school, my current job, whether I was comfortable answering phones, scheduling meetings, and keeping records organized. But every normal question drifted into something more personal. How far exactly was my commute from home? Did I live with family or roommates? Was anyone usually home during the day? When I said I was looking for something full-time, he asked whether my schedule was flexible enough to stay later without checking in with anyone. That wording bothered me. So did the fact that he kept writing things down on the legal pad without really looking at my resume. About 15 minutes in, he said, "This role sometimes involves after-hours support. We need people who are comfortable being discreet." I said I understood. Then he asked, "Could you stay a little longer today if we decide to move forward?" I said I had another commitment around noon. That wasn't true, but it came out before I had time to think. He looked disappointed for the first time. Then he stood up and said, "There's one more thing I want to show you." Instead of opening the office door we came through, he walked to the push-bar door and pressed it open. Behind it was a narrow, unlit hall that smelled faintly like dust and paint. There were 2 doors on one side and another at the far end with no window. "This is the archive side," he said. "Come take a quick look." I stayed where I was. I had passed a restroom in the main building hall on the way in, and suddenly that was the only useful excuse I could think of. I said, "Actually, can I use the bathroom first?" He turned back a little too slowly. "There isn't one on this side." That made no sense. He knew there was one outside the suite unless he barely knew the space himself. I said, "Then I should probably head out." "We're almost done," he said. I picked up my bag. Then I did the only thing that felt natural enough to work. I unlocked my phone, held it to my ear, and said, "Sorry, my mom's calling." My phone wasn't ringing, but the second I said that, something changed in his expression. Not panic, more like a calculation ending. He stepped back from the doorway and gave a short nod. "Of course," he said. "We'll follow up by email." I walked out of that office, through reception, and down the building hallway without looking back. I didn't start moving fast until I was outside. When I got to my car, another woman was just stepping out of hers. Same age as me, maybe, holding a folder and checking her phone. I asked if she was there for Meriton Data Solutions. She said yes. I told her not to go in. I didn't give her every detail. I just said the office felt wrong, the interview wasn't normal, and she should leave. She looked toward the building, then back at me, then got back in her car and drove off. I sat there long enough to watch the second-floor windows. Nobody came out. That afternoon, I looked the company up again. The job listing was gone. The website linked in the original posting now led to a blank page. And when I called the management number from the leasing sign by the entrance, the woman who answered told me Suite 204 had been vacant for almost 3 months.